So, delving deeper into exploring and understanding regulatory drivers. I think a lot of us do know what regulatory drivers are. But let's take a look at it from an angle of breaking it down and studying them. I started to think, where should I begin this evaluation? And I ended up going towards selecting something which is considered least regulated. And I realized that a good way to do it is to try and map one of the things which is least regulated. And I query, what are the requirements all over the world? Well, in trying to do so, I looked up the website of one of the large companies who offer a global market access program. A lot of companies do this. And I'm sure if you are in a large tech company, you have probably a business stream or you're part of it, which offer what is called the Global Market Access Program. So I looked up one of these companies and I looked up basic clothing. So Intertech, who have a global market access portal itself, has a very interesting service that allows a seller or a buyer to access at one place a detailed map of the regulatory or mandatory compliance requirements in order to place a given product in one or several markets. Very interesting, very user friendly that I found this interface. And I looked up what it allowed me to do without paying a fee. So I could zoom into China and I selected what is it required as conformity requirements for basic clothing in China. So it produced a very nice, a very comprehensive report. And I'm going to use that sample report that I received to kind of break down and see how such a regulation or a regulatory driver is structured. What are the building blocks of such a regulatory driver? And where is it that businesses and people can come in potentially or cannot come in order to leverage assurance out of this? Now, this is not necessarily an exact representation of all the requirements. This is more of a sample. And when searched for the product category of jeans and leggings and pants and shorts, etc., the report pointed me to these 4 standards. Let's take a quick look into these to understand how the regulatory driver brings about conformity for the businesses. Let's look at some of these standards. The GB 18401 is a national general safety standard for textile products. It defines the type of products that are covered under it, details various other test methods to measure specific parameters like formaldehyde content, what are the limits for various types. So here you would notice that there is a standard, and then it talks about other standard methods, which are, as I said, test methods. And then the standard defines the limits of what is allowed and what is not. So exactly in the same way, I'll move to some of the other standards which are structured similarly. You have the GB 20400, which is for leather and fur. And just like the earlier method, this too details test methods to measure specific parameters. You may notice that the test method for formaldehyde content is different here. So the general idea is similar. We have the GB 18383, which is for products with filling materials. Just like earlier methods, this goes on to define what is prohibited and the other do's and don'ts for such products. Example, this detail talks about labeling, and you can read through various details that the standard has in its place. There is the GB 21550, which talks about the restriction on hazardous materials in PVC artificial leather. Just like others, this standard also refers to various tests and test methods and evaluate the parameters for limiting values. So let's look at how this is structured by going one layer deeper. You can see that the GB 20400 calls in methods like 19941 and 19942. These in turn call for other methods. Now, these methods, as you can see from this sheet, are calling in references to ISO standards. The ISO standards of 17226 and 17234 are called in from the GB standards. These methods are standard methods, which I hope you recall from the definition. They get into details of ensuring that the measurement of formaldehyde or isocolorants has desired repeatability. And the product standards are used to define permissible limits. Now, this is very interesting to notice how the cascading of standards exists and how there is an interweave between the country standards as well as the standards in international realm. Now, rolling back a little bit, the product standard, the GB 20400, is also called in by a large number of other products like shawls, shoes, footballs, gloves, etc., etc., etc. And the implementation framework involves two different short forms. These two implementation framework entities are the AQSIQ and CIQs. What are these? It is an abbreviation, the AQSIQ, for the General Administration of Quality Supervisor, Inspection and Quarantine of the People's Republic of China. It is a ministerial administrative organ under the State Council of the People's Republic of China in charge of national quality, metrology, entry-exit commodity inspection, entry-exit health quarantine, entry-exit animal and plant quarantine, import-export food safety, certification, accreditation, standardization, as well as the administrative law enforcement. The CIQs are what these are based on. You could consider them as the laws. The entity has set up 35 entry-exit inspection and quarantine bureaus, CIQs, in 31 provinces, with nearly 300 branches in more than 200 local offices across the country, and employs a large set of people. Now, this is from the internet. It could be slightly different in reality. But the point I'm explaining is for you as a listener to understand how this is structured, how the regulatory framework is structured. There is a standard, which is a product standard. There is a test method. Some test methods could be referring to other test methods, international, regional, etc. Now, it's good for you to start thinking that how this could have come to be. Which are the standards that got developed in the first place? How did it get evolved into the legal framework? Do you think the legal framework was developed first and the standards later? How often do you think these get revised? I'm sure you may have answers to some of them in some segments, but it is important to direct your mind into this direction. I'll see you in the next section where we describe supremacy.